There's a belief so deeply embedded in fitness culture that most people have never once stopped to question it. You must eat before you train. Calories in, performance out. Miss a meal, lose strength. Skip food, sacrifice results. It gets repeated by coaches, echoed in gyms, printed on supplement packaging, and passed between friends like common sense that has always been true. But here is what nobody tells you. This rule is not a biological law. It is a cultural habit, one that was built on marketing, reinforced by routine, and held in place by a fear of discomfort that most people have never been given a reason to examine. And when you look at it honestly, not through the lens of tradition, but through the lens of physiology, it begins to crack in ways that are impossible to ignore. The human body did not evolve around scheduled meals, protein shakes, and pre-workout nutrition windows. It evolved around uncertainty, around stretches of abundance followed by stretches of scarcity, around the reality that movement, the hunt, the search, the physical demand of survival almost always came before food arrived, not after. And the body that survived those conditions was not fragile, it was extraordinarily adaptive. It had systems designed to think clearly, move powerfully, and function at a high level before the next meal ever appeared. That body is still yours. Those systems are still inside you. Most modern lifestyles have simply given them no reason to switch on. So the real question is not whether you can exercise without eating. Millions of people do it every morning before they ever reach the kitchen. The real question is what actually happens inside your body when you do, what systems activate, what fuel gets used, what changes hormonally, metabolically, neurologically, and whether those changes represent damage or adaptation. Because the answer to that question is far more interesting and far less frightening than the fitness industry has led most people to believe. Before going any further, one thing needs to be said clearly. Everything explored here is for educational understanding only. It is not medical advice and should not be treated as a prescription. Every body is different. People with a history of eating disorders, those managing diabetes or blood sugar conditions, anyone who is pregnant, breastfeeding, underweight, or on medications that affect metabolism should speak with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to how they train or eat. The goal here is not to tell you what to do, it is to give you the understanding to make better decisions for yourself. To grasp what fasted exercise actually does, you first have to dismantle a fundamental misunderstanding about how energy works. Most people think energy is something you borrow from your last meal. You eat, the fuel arrives, you use it, and when it runs out, you need to eat again. This picture is not just incomplete, it is largely backwards. Energy is not something the body borrows, it is something the body manages continuously, with extraordinary precision, whether food is present or not. Your meals are not immediate gasoline, they are deposits into a metabolic account that your body draws from across hours, and in some systems, across days. When you wake up in the morning after a night of sleep, you are already operating on reserves. You have been for hours. Those reserves come from two primary sources. The first is glycogen, carbohydrate that your body converts and stores in your liver and muscles. Glycogen is fast to access and the body's preferred fuel when demands are high, but it is limited by design. It exists to bridge short gaps, to handle surges in demand, not to sustain life indefinitely. The second reserve is fat, and this is where most people carry a deeply inaccurate picture. Fat is not a passive accumulation problem sitting inertly beneath your skin, waiting to be burned off by sufficient effort. Fat is an active, regulated energy system. Even in lean individuals, fat tissue represents an enormous reservoir of usable fuel, enough, by some estimates, to sustain the body for weeks. From a purely biological standpoint, fat is not excess, it is insurance. It is the body's long-game energy solution, designed for sustained demand across time. The problem is that most modern lifestyles never allow this system to fully engage. Frequent eating keeps insulin levels chronically elevated. Elevated insulin sends a clear signal to the body. Stored energy is unnecessary right now. Incoming fuel is abundant. Fat does not need to be released. Over time, with that signal repeating meal after meal, snack after snack, the body's ability to access fat becomes undertrained. Not lost, not broken, just dormant, like a skill that hasn't been practiced in years. Fasted exercise is one of the most direct and physiologically grounded ways to begin practicing that skill again. When food intake pauses for several hours, as it does during an overnight fast, insulin levels fall. As insulin drops, fat cells receive a fundamentally different instruction: release energy, begin making fuel available. This is not an emergency signal. It is not the body entering crisis mode or cannibalizing itself out of desperation. It is a completely normal metabolic transition that the body was designed to execute smoothly. The body is not starving, it is shifting fuel sources the way it has always known how to do when given the space to do it. Now, add movement into that state. Exercise increases energy demand. In a fed state, that demand is met primarily with glycogen because insulin is elevated and glucose is plentiful. But in a fasted state, the body is working with lower glycogen availability and low insulin, which means it has to adapt. It begins pulling more heavily from fat stores. It starts producing ketones, molecules synthesized from fat that serve as a remarkably clean and stable alternative fuel source for both muscle tissue and the brain. This shift is not instant. For people unaccustomed to it, the early sessions can feel strange or difficult. But strange and difficult are not the same as harmful. Often what feels like discomfort is simply the sensation of the body adjusting to a demand it has not been asked to meet in a long time. Discomfort in this context is not damage, it is adaptation in progress. The concept that ties all of this together is metabolic flexibility. A metabolically flexible body can shift efficiently between burning glucose and burning fat, depending on what is available and what is needed. A metabolically inflexible body has become so dependent on constant glucose that it struggles intensely the moment fuel is delayed, producing fatigue, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and a gnawing urgency to eat that feels like an emergency, but is, in most cases, simply the body's underdeveloped ability to switch fuel sources. Fasted exercise is one of the most effective tools available for rebuilding that flexibility, and research supports this consistently. Studies across multiple metabolic laboratories have shown that aerobic exercise performed in a fasted state significantly increases fat oxidation compared to the identical exercise performed after eating. This is not a fringe observation, it is a repeatable, well-documented metabolic response. Low insulin unlocks fat availability, movement creates the demand, the body does the rest. But the benefits extend well beyond which fuel source is being used. Hormonal patterns shift meaningfully as well. Growth hormone, a molecule critical for tissue preservation, cellular repair, and fat mobilization, rises significantly during fasting. Exercise independently spikes growth hormone. Together, in a fasted training state, they create a hormonal environment that strongly favors protecting muscle while encouraging fat release. This matters enormously because the most common fear people bring to this topic is muscle loss, the idea that training without eating will result in the body consuming its own muscle for fuel. Physiologically, this fear is exaggerated to the point of being misleading. Muscle is metabolically expensive tissue. The body does not destroy it casually. In a fasted state, particularly when growth hormone is elevated, the body goes to significant lengths to preserve functional tissue. Muscle breakdown from short-term fasting combined with moderate exercise is not a meaningful risk for healthy individuals. At the same time, insulin sensitivity, the muscle's ability to absorb glucose efficiently, improves when training happens under low insulin conditions. Muscles trained in a fasted state become more effective at using glucose when it does arrive. This adaptation doesn't just help during the workout, it extends benefits into the hours and days that follow, improving overall metabolic health in ways that persist well beyond any individual session. Then there's the effect on the brain. Many people who try fasted training for the first time are surprised to discover not the mental fog they expected, but the opposite, a clarity of thought, a sharpness of focus, a kind of clean-edged alertness that feels different from the post-meal heaviness they've come to accept as normal. This is not coincidence, and it's not placebo. Ketones provide a stable, efficient fuel source for the brain. Fasting also increases the production of neurotransmitters associated with alertness, motivation, and cognitive precision. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes perfect sense. Hunger historically demanded problem-solving, strategic thinking, and coordinated action, not mental paralysis. The brain that shuts down when food is delayed would not have survived long enough to become the brain you have today. None of this means fasted exercise is universally superior or appropriate for every person in every context. The goal is not to replace all training with fasted sessions. It is to understand the mechanisms so that the choice becomes informed rather than reflexive. And understanding those mechanisms requires one more layer of clarity: how different types of exercise interact with the fasted state. Because not all movement makes the same demands, and the alignment between exercise type and metabolic state is everything. Low to moderate intensity aerobic exercise is where fasted training performs most naturally. Walking, light jogging, steady cycling, easy rowing, any activity where breathing stays controlled, conversation remains possible, and the body is not being pushed toward its upper limits. At these intensities, the body relies primarily on fat oxidation. Glycogen use is minimal. The fasted state doesn't limit performance here, it supports it. Fat provides an abundant, steady fuel supply for sustained lower-intensity movement, and when insulin is low, that fuel is readily available. Once the body has had a few weeks to adapt, many people find that fasted aerobic sessions feel surprisingly smooth and sustainable. Hunger becomes quieter. Energy becomes more stable. The initial awkwardness gives way to an efficiency that simply wasn't accessible before. High-intensity exercise tells a different story. Sprinting, interval training, explosive circuits, maximal effort conditioning, these activities demand rapid fuel delivery at a speed that fat metabolism cannot match alone. They rely heavily on glycogen, and in a fasted state, that glycogen is partially depleted. This doesn't make high-intensity fasted training impossible or dangerous for everyone, but it does make it significantly harder, particularly for people who have not yet spent weeks adapting their metabolism to fat-dominant fueling. Many people who try intense fasted workouts early on, without that adaptation period, conclude that fasted exercise simply doesn't work for them. What they have actually discovered is that they applied the wrong stimulus at the wrong stage. Adaptation takes time. Forcing intensity before the metabolic foundation is built reliably produces poor performance and negative experience. Resistance training sits in a more nuanced middle ground. Lifting weights does use glycogen, particularly during heavy compound movements, but resistance training also triggers a powerful hormonal response. Growth hormone and catecholamines both increase during fasted lifting, which provides significant protection for muscle tissue during the session. Many people maintain stable strength levels while lifting fasted, especially after adaptation. The critical variable is not the workout itself, but what follows it. Resistance training creates micro-damage in muscle fibers, which is the necessary biological signal for growth and repair. That repair requires amino acids. If someone trains fasted and then continues fasting for an extended period afterward, the body lacks the building materials needed for optimal recovery. The most effective approach for most people is to position resistance training near the end of a fasting window and break the fast with a protein-rich meal shortly after. This preserves the metabolic benefits of training fasted while respecting the biological requirements of muscle repair. Throughout all of this, one principle remains non-negotiable. Fasted training is not a test of willpower. Warning signs should never be ignored. Persistent dizziness, sudden weakness, confusion, heart palpitations, or severe nausea during a fasted session are not signals to push through. They are signals to stop. The body is communicating that it is under stress beyond its current capacity. That information is valuable. Suppressing it is not discipline, it is a mistake. Hydration and electrolytes also deserve serious attention. When insulin is low, the kidneys excrete more sodium and water than usual. This is a normal physiological response, but it increases the risk of dehydration and electrolyte imbalance during fasted movement. Many of the symptoms people attribute to fasting, headaches, fatigue, muscle cramps, lightheadedness, are actually signs of inadequate sodium or fluid intake. These symptoms often resolve quickly with proper hydration in a small amount of sodium. Water alone is frequently not enough. This is basic physiology, not a supplementation trend. What happens after the fast ends is equally important and almost universally underexplored. When food returns, insulin rises. The body shifts from energy release mode into repair and replenishment mode. Glycogen begins refilling. Tissue repair begins in earnest. Hormonal priorities reorganize. This transition is not a failure of the fasting process, it is the completion of it. The cycle only works when both phases are honored. In the immediate period after breaking a fast, the digestive system is re-engaging after a relative rest. Light movement, walking, gentle cycling, stretching, mobility work supports this transition without overwhelming the body's reorganizing resources. Elevated insulin sensitivity in the post-fast window means that incoming nutrients, particularly carbohydrates, are handled with exceptional efficiency. Glucose is directed toward muscle replenishment rather than fat storage. This is a metabolically favorable moment for strategic refueling, and those who understand it can use it deliberately rather than reactively. One of the most overlooked psychological risks of fasting is what happens at this boundary. Some people experience a powerful urge to overeat after fasting, not from physiological need, but from a fear-driven reaction to having restricted intake. Structured, intentional refeeding reduces this risk significantly. Choosing nutrient-dense foods, eating with awareness rather than urgency, and paying attention to genuine satiety signals helps restore trust in the body's communication. The goal of refeeding is not compensation, it is completion. Perhaps the most important reframe of everything discussed here is this: fasted exercise is a tool, not an identity. It does not need to be performed daily. It does not need to be applied to every training session or every intensity level. Many people benefit most from using it selectively, 2 or 3 times per week during aerobic or lighter sessions, while training in a fed state on days focused on strength or high-intensity work. This selective approach mirrors the conditions human metabolism actually evolved under: periods of availability followed by periods of reliance on reserves, exertion before food and exertion after food, in a natural alternating rhythm that kept the body's adaptive systems fully engaged across a lifetime. The persistent myths that surround this topic deserve to be named directly. Fasted exercise does not automatically cause muscle loss. Muscle breakdown is driven by prolonged energy deficiency and inadequate protein over time, not by short-term fasting combined with moderate movement. Fasted exercise is not only useful for fat loss. The broader benefit is metabolic flexibility, a quality that makes the body more resilient, more adaptable, and less fragile in the face of any change in eating pattern or energy availability. And fasted exercise is not an extreme practice. An overnight fast of 12 to 14 hours is not a radical act. It is a physiological state that was essentially universal throughout human history. The problem is not fasting itself. The problem is how unfamiliar it has become. Ultimately, this entire conversation points toward a single shift in perspective. Your body is not fragile. It does not require constant input to function. It does not fall apart when a meal is delayed or a training session happens before breakfast. It has systems, sophisticated, ancient, refined over hundreds of thousands of years, designed to perform under exactly those conditions. Understanding those systems doesn't just answer the question of whether you can work out while fasting. It answers a deeper question about what your body is actually capable of when you stop managing it entirely out of fear and start working with the intelligence already built into it.
The better question has never been whether you should always eat before you exercise. The better question is this: when does eating before training serve your goals? And when does the absence of food allow your body to access something it cannot reach any other way? That answer will look different for every person, but it starts in the same place for everyone. Not with a protocol, not with a rule, with curiosity and with the willingness to understand your own biology more honestly than the fitness industry has ever encouraged you to.